Today on our podcast, we are thrilled to introduce two distinguished guests, James Meadows and Jor'Don Daigle, who are making significant strides in the field of robotics engineering. James, a dynamic engineer at Torque Robotics, has interned with top firms like Motorman, Tesla, and General Motors, specializing in safety of autonomous trucks. Joining him is Jor'Don Daigle, a skilled robotics and controls engineer for Noble Plastics, Inc., known for optimizing industrial robotics and manufacturing processes with a robust education background from Louisiana State University. Together, they are not only pushing technological boundaries, but also driving forward mentorship and innovation in automation. Tune in as we explore the groundbreaking work and valuable insights.
Confidence, yeah. It really shouldn't be no arguments, cause you're now viewing the greatest of all time, saying I can't get better, I promise.
Welcome to the BlerdOut Show, Jor'Don and James. Man, if you guys can just start out, explain a little bit to the audience about what you do, who you are in the industry, and we'll start with you, James.
Yeah, I'm James Meadows. I'm a robotics engineer for Torque Robotics. I work on developing the safety platform for Torque Robotics. Before that, I worked as a hardware engineer for Amazon Robotics, working on some of their industrial robotics. And before that, I worked for Georgia Pacific, working on industrial robotics.
That's awesome. Jor'Don?
So my name is Jor'Don Daigle. I'm a robotics engineer. Currently, I work for Noble Plastics in Louisiana. Mainly robotics, integration, automation, even things that are not particularly related to robotics, anything that's automation related, from PLCs to anything VFDs. Before that, I worked for JR Automation in South Carolina division, pretty much doing the exact same thing. And before that, I worked for International Paper in Louisiana. And that's where I really got my first start working with VFDs and PLCs.
Yeah, man, that's awesome because, just from the both of you, people probably don't realize that robots are doing the work there, right? And both of you know, I've been a robotics engineer for 25 years. I think it's been about 25 years. That's including college and both, internship and then career-wise. But have you seen the transformation of robotics since you guys got started, and what do you think is next for robotics and as it relates to manufacturing automation?
Yeah, so I think in manufacturing automation, there's definitely been a shift. There are a lot of robots, and the advent of AI is just the robots are a lot smarter. They're doing a lot more different things, and you could take one robot and it can just be applied to so many different situations, as opposed to before it was just hey, this robot is just picking place.
Yeah. What about you? What's the
I'd say
it
definitely has changed because when I first got an exposure to an industrial robot, there's a lot of things that are talked about now that weren't talked about then, from things like collaborative robots to scale robots, which are high-speed pick-and-place robots. So mainly it was just 6-axis or 4-axis pick-and-place robots, but now they're looking to integrate the robot closer to the human and allow the human to work closer with the robot. So yeah, I definitely think it's changing from when I first started.
Now, it would be my assumption that most of our audience has no idea what an industrial robot is, right? You just name some of the different types, right? What is the reaction of most people when you tell them that you're a robotics engineer? What do they think a robot engineer does? And that might help our audience, a robot engineer, what the heck do you do? And what's a robot look like? Because they might be thinking about Wall-E or what was the, on the Jetsons, you had different robots, but then you got some people that think Terminator, right? And now we got, companies like General Dynamics and say, oh, did you see that robot that flipped, on top of the box and, it started running? Talk about that. How do people react when you say I'm a robotics engineer? And what do they think robotics is versus what it is to you?
Yeah, for sure. I wanted to do robotics for a very long time, and even when I said it in school, they were like, "Oh, so you want to go build Skynet and things like that." So it's mostly they thought it seems really complex and really hard and things of that nature. But in reality, I think that robotics is it has difficult portions, but through hard work and things like that is kind of it's very accessible.
Yeah, dope.
Definitely. I think the biggest response I've gotten from people is that I build robots. And it's that I know I don't work for a robot manufacturer. I don't actually, assemble the robots. I program them. So that's the biggest thing that people think they don't understand, that I'm a programmer versus I actually screw nuts and bolts in and, bolt this thing together. That's not what I do.
Right. Yeah. No. Same. I get a lot of different things. Of course, I've talked about different cartoons that have robots, and like I said, the Terminator. But mostly, it's like, oh, you build robots. I'm like, not exactly. Like we order a robot, and then we create, a tool for the robot to make it do whatever we want it to do. Right. The same robot that's used for building cars is used for processing food. Right. The same one that puts together a plane, an aircraft, is also used for picking and placing, or even a roller coaster like the RoboCoaster. Shout out to the KUKA Robotics team out in Florida, right? So there's a lot of different ways you can use the same type of 6-axis robot. But then you talked about high speed, right, where you might use a Delta robot or a Scare robot, which is highly used in the pharmaceuticals. Food processing. Most people haven't seen how Oreos get inside the packages, right? It's just like in the crackers. I worked for a salty snacks potato chip manufacturer, and it's like, well, how the bags of chips get inside the boxes, and how the boxes get on the pallet, right? And they have no idea that there are robots there. When I left General Motors during the bankruptcy or right afterwards, it was a really exciting time for automation because there were so many people from the manufacturing world of automotive going to other industries that did not use robotics at the time. So, it was very unfamiliar for me to be in another field like, food manufacturing. And I didn't even eat potato chips, but, the job was great. It was wonderful working there. But they also didn't use the automation technology. And so it was like really weird for me to walk in and see people everywhere, right? Where I was used to 400 vehicles coming off of a line every 8 hours, and people still believed that people were doing it, right? It's like you did not think that there's a bunch of people around the building just putting cars together all day. Like there's no way you can do it, right? But the truth is they don't realize that, and that's why this discussion is important. But I digress. So you brought up something, James, about when you first said you wanted to be a robotics engineer. Like, I like for both of you, and I'm going to start with you, James, to talk about how did you get introduced to robotics, and why did you want to do it, so that, for somebody, one of our listeners out there, how they might want to get into it. So share your story.
Yeah, so my story starts with you. You came to career fair when I was in 5th grade, and you had this little toy model robot, and you said that you work on these things, and then ever since then I was kind of hooked, and you said you were starting a robot team. And I joined the robot team, and ever since then, working with you and everything, I just gained the passion for robotics and stuck with it. And you were gracious enough to take me on as a mentee, and kind of led the path for me to become a robot engineer.
Yeah, and thank you and your parents for allowing me to do that, because I was too young in my career at that time. So that was real special for me. And you were the first person to say, I want to be a robotics engineer. And then you're right, we started a robotics team, which you might not know. I don't know if I ever told you. When it was time to announce who made the robotics team, the teacher called me and said, that kid, James, he was the first person to sign up on the list to be on the robotics team. He has checked this wall every day to see if he made it. So when I was announcing the kids who made the team, and our first team, I think we had 20 or 30 kids. And I announced your name last on purpose. And I was watching the whole time, look at him over there just sweating, right? He doesn't think he's going to be on the team, where, of course, you were definitely my number one. But I was like, since we know he made the team, we're going to let him see how, be the last person to be chosen. But you also were the only individual who had to exit the team briefly as well, right? Yeah. And so we had a criteria on my robotics team that you had to achieve a 3.0 or better to stay on the team. And I don't know, I'll tell the story. And so James, had dreams of going to being the best robot engineer in the world, and which I wanted to be part of, right? Because I felt the same way about myself and my career. And when he didn't hit the mark for the criteria, we had to make some really tough decisions. However, I gave him a goal to reach, and he exceeded that, right? It was he might have had a 2.8. He came back and had a 3.8 the following semester, got back on the team, and then his team was the one who won the world championship that year. And I think, maybe you're in 8th grade, 7th, 8th grade? Yeah. I don't know.
Something around there.
I think it was maybe 8th grade. So that was a real special moment, and you've done great things ever since. So thank you for trusting me. Yeah. Jordan.
And that's real perseverance, though. Hearing you say that he didn't meet the mark. Sometimes we have to show people that everything's not given to you.
Yeah.
And I think that was a really defining moment that probably impacted a lot of everything you did, because even though you guys were close, you weren't just going to give it to them. Like, because, you got to work and you have to grow. But I like that part. I like that part.
And you're right.
Because I'm a real big guy on perseverance. So.
Yeah, and everyone on the team knew that I was close to James. Like, it wasn't a secret, right?
Yeah.
This is somebody
we don't give anything away.
Because he has to program the robot. And Mr. Southern's a programmer. Everybody knew that James wanted to be a robot engineer. So it was that much more important why I wanted to see him go after it, where a lot of kids would have given up at that moment. Say,
Most definitely.
I failed. I didn't make the criteria. That's it for me. My dreams are over. Now, that is not what happened. For any young member, audience member who's listening out there, like, don't give up, right? He was met with a challenge. Not only did he, exceed that, but also in high school, never saw less than a 3.5. In college, never saw less than a 3.5. He worked for free for Modal Man Robotics just to understand the essence of robotic engineering and make sure that, is this really what I want to do? And as we see, we have a robot engineer here today. So yeah, that's a dope story. I want to make sure we shared that.
Yeah.
I like that.
Thank you.
All right.
Jordan, how'd you get introduced to it?
Okay, so my story starts back at LSU. So the way this starts out is I was in school and I had a normal job working at like a clothing store. And I realized I needed more time on campus to focus on school, because I was having to go to school, go to class, drive to work, and be at work till 10:30, 11 o'clock at night, and then come back and have to study. And I was like, I need to figure out a way to study and work slightly and just kind of stay around campus so it's easier for me to study. So I was just having a conversation with a random classmate, and she goes, well, there's a lady that's doing research on campus for robotics. I'd never thought about robotics. I'd never talked to anybody about robotics. And I said, okay, well, I'll go have a talk with her. So I found her office, and I literally just knocked on the door and walked in. And it was an African-American lady, Dr. LaVonda Brown, from Georgia Tech. And she was very, very nice. And so I had a conversation with her, and I told her, I was like, hey, I just, want to try to do a little research and work for you. And she was like, okay, I think I may have an opening and allow another student to come on. And she had a couple of students already working with her. So she allowed me to come on, and it was more than just working for her. Like, she literally took me as a young kid, African-American kid, trying to be an engineer. And she said, no, this is how you need to do this. This is how you need to do that. She helped me rearrange my resume. She taught me about robotics, of course, and it was humanoid robotics, so it wasn't industrial robotics. And it was a lot of interesting things she taught me that really structured my professional life. Like, it was the baseline to my resume I have today. It was the baseline to it that started it, from structure all the way to what I put in it. And I remember what happened was there was a career fair going on, and I was going to go, and I went and met with the school's career resume building office. And I told the lady, hey, I just started doing this robotics work, probably 2-3 months research. Should I put it on my resume? I was like, I didn't know. I was like, I don't want to tell people that I've been doing this for a while and, kind of formulate a misconception of, what's going on. She's like, no, I don't think you should put it on. So I went back to Dr. Brown and I said, she told me not to put it on. She said, what? She said, no, sit down. And she put it, and she restructured my resume. She said, no, this is what you're doing. This is what you're telling me you're researching, and this is what you're learning. I took that resume and I went to the career fair. So I talked to a bunch of different companies. And I got a few, hey, nice to meet you, take your resume, and this, that, and the third. And I was walking out. I hadn't had any great work. And a lady from across the room, probably about halfway across the room, we were in like a big assembly room. She screams, and I quote, hey, do you want a job? I said, yeah. So I walked over, and it was the Air Force. And I said, well, I don't want to join the Air Force. She said, no, you're not going to join the Air Force. She said, they have civilian internships. I said, what? Okay. So I told her what I was doing. She took my resume. She said, I think we may have something for you. So I ended up getting accepted to the role as an intern. and I went to Macon, Georgia at Warner Robins Air Force Base, and I started doing robotics work. And so what happened was, it was maybe about 80 kids they accepted. I was the only kid that was doing robotics. I think they may have been one more kid that joined on maybe like 4 or 5 weeks after I started, and he was working with us. But for the first 5 weeks out of 80 kids, I was the only one working on robotics. And the guy, when I showed up, I told him what I knew about a little bit about humanoid robotics. He did not look like me, but I wasn't worried, because what he told me was, he said, it doesn't matter what you've learned or what you know. If you show up to work every day on time, I will teach you everything you need to know, and you're going to be good at what you do.
That's right.
And he did not lie. Yeah. And he did that exact thing. And he was honest with me from the first day all the way to the last day. And he taught me the baseline of industrial robotics, how to program. And so from there, I went back to school, and I actually ended up getting put on a senior project that involved industrial robotics. From there, I took a job outside of college, after college, that it wasn't industrial robotics, but I knew like I needed to get back into this, because like this is what the first thing that I did that I truly felt like this is what I want to do. So that's the baseline of how I got to where I am, was those people kind of structuring, and it was, honestly, it was nobody but God, because like it's no way I would have met or made myself meet these people. Like, he strategically aligned myself, because even when I got to my first job, I met a guy that showed me how to do what I do. And he took it very slow with me. And he was an older gentleman, an older African-American gentleman, and he was working in automation. And he showed me the baseline of everything that was not robot related, but more so like PLCs. He showed me the baseline of all that. And to this day, I mean, they made me, kind of who I am, like from a perspective of work-wise.
Right. Was there ever a time, Jor'Don, where you felt like, as a black robotics engineer, like that wasn't something that was real for you? Like, did you have any, mentors or a black robotics engineer, like, even though that part existed for you?
As far as the question is, like, did I have a time when I was working when I felt like I didn't know this existed? Or
right, yes.
Most definitely from the time it started. Like, I didn't know this was a thing. I knew humanoid robots. I didn't know about industrial robots. I didn't meet anyone that was, you guys are literally the first robotics engineers that are African American that I've met. I've met other like PLC guys and, guys that work at drives, but that work with robots and can program robots. You guys are the first guys I've ever met that's African American. But it was definitely a time where I felt like, should I be doing this? Right. Is it for me? And then I had to sit back and think, God wouldn't have put me here if it wasn't for me. That's right. Like he strategically went through too many turns and nooks and crannies. Like, I didn't just walk into this. No one handed me this job. I didn't know anyone. There's never been a job that I got that somebody just gave it to me. I had to actually prove that I knew what I needed to know to do it. So it's like, I definitely felt like after a certain point in time, it was for me.
Yeah, got it. And James, can you kind of share with the audience kind of how our mentee-mentor relationship has evolved over the years, and why that might be in mentoring, having a mentor might be important for somebody who wants to be a robotics engineer like you?
Yeah, I think, like, at first I just saw you as like my robotics coach and everything, and then it kind of evolved over time as I went to college and things of that nature, to just like a big brother little brother relationship. Like, we began to just talk about things outside of robotics, and just like I would go to my first parties and you'd be like, hey, don't drink that with that and stuff like that.
I remember that.
Yeah. And then just like relationship stuff and everything. So like over time, it just kind of grew and expanded, and I'm really grateful for it.
Yeah. Do you believe like a true mentor-mentee relationship is really about the bond that you build outside of the specific technical piece? Like like just talking robots probably isn't enough for a good relationship. You agree with that?
Yeah, I think that they kind of help each other as well, right? Because without the kind of non-technical stuff, you may not like have enough confidence or trust to like build that relationship so you can kind of like talk about where you're deficient and so that they can help you and things of that nature. So I think like the interpersonal stuff like really helps you to build a better relationship so that you can help your mentee more.
So I mean, your path to robotics has probably been more unique than anybody I know, and including myself. Because one would believe that with all the robot programs that are out there now, everybody should know how to get to robotics. But if that was true, then there wouldn't be so many jobs in robotics available if everybody was going through. I was in robotics as a kid, but you didn't turn into a robot engineer. You did, however,
Yeah.
right? So what have been some of the key challenges for you going from the school, post secondary, in academia, and then now to the professional world?
Yeah, I would say like the after like I left high school, right? There aren't many robotics engineering programs. So the first challenge that you go through is just kind of like what do I need to study to do robotics? Do I do computer science? Do I do mechanical or do I do electrical? And just kind of figuring out like where you want to go. I chose electrical because I it just kind of spoke to me the most. So after that, it's just kind of like figuring out like how to get an internship and like where you want to go in robotics. Just knowing you, like I knew I wanted to go into like manufacturing and things of that nature, and I was able to have a relationship with Glenn at Motoman as well.
Yeah.
So I was able to use that to go work back at Motoman and leverage that opportunity to go work at General Motors.
Right.
So that gave me an end to just kind of like figure out where I wanted to go. And after I figured out I wanted to do industrial robotics, I kind of stayed in that lane. So
Dope. Yeah, I mean, for me, it was 1999. I had a mentor who was a black man at General Motors. He was in welding. And I think on my first or second day, we were walking past a robot in the laboratory. And I said, "What's that?" And he said, "Oh, that's the robot. You want to go over there and do it?" I'm like, "Yeah, take me over there." And I can't remember what engineer I was working with because that was a long time ago. And he was like, "Yeah, I'll let you program." And I started programming. I was supposed to weld two coupons together. I missed on the arc. It was an arc weld. I missed the bead, the seam. I couldn't tell I missed it, but until they took the metal apart and both pieces of metal on the floor, and everything like, oh. But I just remember walking away like, man, that was exciting.
Yeah.
Like I want to do that again. And each year they asked me, what group do you want to come back in? We want to bring you back next summer. And I was like, I want to be in the robot group. So then I did controls. And then I came back another summer and I said, what group you want to be in? I want to be in the robotics group. And I went to conveyors, right? And I was always working with the robots, but, I wasn't on the team, right? It was like, I want to be on the team, right? And so my fourth and final summer, honestly, I was supposed to graduate. And I had an offer and everything to come to General Motors. And I had this one instructor who just loved failing everybody. And I had to have this class to graduate. So I literally had to go back to school for one class and spend 12 credit hours, at least 12 credit hours, for this one class that only happened in the spring. So I couldn't just stay a semester. I had to stay a whole year. It was fun, though. But,
I know exactly what you
I had a
mean.
good time sitting there for one class. And then I got invited to be part of the robotics group. And my dreams had come true. Believe it or not, though, there wasn't a me there, right? And I didn't know it until many years later, right? All of my mentorship came from individuals who didn't look like me. They took me under their wing. They basically said, "Hey, Terrence, if you listen, we'll teach you. If you don't, we're gonna leave you hanging, right?
Exactly.
And you're gonna fail." And so it was just about listening, paying attention. My first programming exercise was in Shreveport, Louisiana. On the project, I think it was on the S10 maybe at the time, and out of 16 robots, 15 of them were good.
Yeah.
The first one, it crashed right now, but it was like it was 2 weeks after I programmed, and I'm just like, why did that crash? And I'm just sitting there looking like, I don't know. And then I remember I didn't know how to step through the robot path in like the auto mode, right? Where I was driving, like I was literally like going, one line at a time. And I remember I programmed it with the weld gun closed the whole time. So when it went to programming, the gun was closed and it just slammed into everything. And I did so many different things. And I didn't uprooted a whole table out the ground because I forgot to let go of the bolts. It was just a lot of weird stuff would happen. But, my education in robotics came from people who didn't look like me. And I'm very thankful for those gentlemen because they
100%.
became friends, they became brothers to me. But there was always a desire to have someone who looked like me teach me, right? So I had a connection with somebody else. That didn't happen for me, and then I realized it was my responsibility to carry the torch as to bringing, I didn't know I was a pioneer. I didn't know I was a Jackie Robinson of anything, right? I was just doing my job as far as I was concerned. Until I met James, and it was like, okay, I get to foster somebody through this path, and where's there another me? And you look on Google, and that didn't exist. That continued to happen over time. Right now, I probably get at least one young man or one lady who reaches out to me probably at least once a week or every other week and says, how do I get into robotics, right? And what does that look like for me? And it's kind of weird right now because how do you guide them? Because there isn't a big association that, kind of pushes that. I mean, you have A3 who does a great job with diversity and kind of inviting others in, right? Because I know Latino, robot engineers like Roland Manasseh, who I used to work for, is a great robotics source. And, from the Puerto Rican community, you got Eric Nieves, right, who's a brilliant, right, one of the brightest robotic engineers I know.
Right.
So, they're culturally, the robot industry is growing, but what needs to be done to see more of ourselves in this space so that it isn't just us three and then you got the people in academia, because academia and professional
That's two separate things. That's two separate things.
Right? What do you think needs to be done to see more of us in the robot industry?
Yeah, I would say one of the things that needs to be done is that it needs to start at a lower level. Growing up, we were the only robotics team in Detroit for a very long time.
That's right, we were.
Yeah. So I would say
the only black robotics.
Yeah, the only black
Detroit,
robotics
right,
team.
there you go.
And we'd go against schools like the private rich schools and beat them. And
we had some good stuff. It was a little wild there for a little bit. It felt like there were times where it felt like we had jumped back to the 1960s, where it was not comfortable to watch a team full of black kids walk into the room. We had some really difficult times in 2007.
Come on, man.
Right, it was not fun. I remember our first competition, you guys stood on the wall. You wouldn't sit in the crowd with the group of kids.
Yeah.
Right, you guys did not want to sit there and we walked out of there feeling defeated. But we went back and won. Yeah. Right, the next time, right? And then came the championship at RoboFest, where we were still the only black team there. That was years later. We were still the only black team there. And I remember when we beat this one school, and I don't know what state they were from or country even, because this was the world championship. And I remember this mother, Caucasian mother, had her son, and she's like, "How dare you lose to them?" Right? It was not normal to see a bunch of black kids walk in the room and walk out with the trophy. That was not normal for us. Right? It wasn't normal for us, because we didn't know we were going to do it, right? Right? We were confident, but we didn't know it was going to happen that way. But we also didn't know that in 2007, 2008, 2009, that the reaction of us winning was going to be so disturbing to an audience that didn't look like us, because it wasn't like all of our families were there. Right. We didn't paint the room, with our families and friends.
He was alone.
We walked in, we went to go compete, and we walked out with the trophy, got on the bus, and went home. Right. And this is 2008. So it was very challenging, but look at us now. Look at us now. Right. What about you, Jordan? What do you think needs to happen in the robotics field to see more of us there?
I definitely agree with the earlier age exposure, but I think another thing too is understanding the avenues you have to get here. There's multiple avenues you have to get here. There's college. There's I guess you would call it associates, 2-year programs, and understanding you can go engineering, you can go mechatronics, you can go pretty much. There's a lot of different ways you can get to here. Now, the paths that you take to get here can sometimes dictate how far you can go once you're here. And that's something that we should be knowledgeable of. But I definitely think just educating the people and putting the information out there, like, you have multiple options. Like, if you don't want to do 4-year degree, you can do this, but understand when you do this, you may get in the door, but you may be limited because to be a manager, you may need to have a 4-year degree at some companies. That just may be a regulation or a rule. So just understanding it. I think because for me personally, I had no idea like how to do it. Like I said, I was kind of just like guided into it divinely. Like it wasn't like I knew I wanted to do this from a kid. Like when I went to college, I didn't know what I wanted to go to school for. Yeah. I didn't know I wanted to be an engineer. Like that's how far-fetched it was. My dad was like, "Oh, go be a doctor, son." And in the back of my mind, I was like, I'm not gonna be a doctor. Like that's just not my thing. Right. I knew I liked computers because I had a cousin that worked with computers. So I knew I liked computers, but I didn't know how I was going to navigate that. That's the only thing I knew I liked was computers. I thought about IT, but electrical engineering is where I settled at. So,
got it. You know that's special because a lot of people don't know how to get here, right? And you know it's different, right? Because you say robotics, yeah. But I wonder if you guys. Now let me ask this question, and you know, depending on how you guys answer, I'll ask another question. Like, did you know that McKinsey and Company reported that by 2030, that the last baby boomer will then walk off the line, and with that said, that automation will take over, and that 80 to 90% of the people who would be displaced are Black and brown individuals who work in manufacturing facilities.
Operators.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So are you guys aware of that?
I didn't know that, but I didn't know that, but from working in the industry,
you can see that. So
like I know who the operators are. Like I know, right. Like it's like
yeah. So with that said, my next question, and I'll be honest, like the question I'm gonna ask is one of the reasons why I started my program. Do you guys ever feel a sense of guilt based on what you do for a living, knowing that what you're doing, your process that you're developing with robotics is going to potentially remove a job? And how do you work through that?
I'll answer that question because that's something that I've fought with since I was an intern. Mm-hmm. And I function on this philosophy. Doing what I do should not take a job. If a company is putting this robot in here to specifically take a job from someone, it's not gonna work because we all work in robotics and we know things can go wrong with robots and people must be knowledgeable. The first line defense is your operator. They must be knowledgeable enough to deal with it on a basic level. So I believe it doesn't take their job, it transforms their job. Yeah. Perfect example, my first project was integrating a robot to inspect aircraft components with the Air Force. Mm-hmm. It was a very strenuous task for the operator to do it with his eyes and check it. We developed a robot. There was an integrator that came in, and we worked with them to integrate the robot. And I actually the integrator actually couldn't figure out how to program it. Mm. They brought it into the facility, and they could not get it to run. And I actually got it to run. First time I ever programming a robot. And impressive. I mean, it wasn't a beautiful code, but it ran. But what it didn't take that operator's job. It allowed him to be able to view these images on a computer, and it made his job easier. Mm-hmm. So in my head, I think robotics should be used on making things more efficient and helping people versus just taking someone's job, because you're never going to be able to throw a robot in the corner and it run for 20 years and never have a mistake.
That's right.
And most managers in plants, they just manage. They don't really know how to troubleshoot something because they don't watch it run every day. They walk by it, you know, but as if to say, if it faults out, they're going to probably call their engineer, or the operator is going to be able to tell them what happened. So I don't think that it should take people's jobs.
Yeah. What about you, James? You ever feel a sense of guilt for what you do and how the impact it can make?
I think at first I would agree there. I think, but the thing that makes me feel better about it is that like when you add in these types of robots, an additional component is safety, right? Like in the body shop in a car plant, for example, there are a lot of robots because like a lot of the welding, smog, and things like that was causing a lot of issues with a lot of people working there. So we put in a lot of robots because it like makes it safer for people to work there. Yeah. and stuff like that.
We had
So,
sandblasting robots
Yep.
in the Air Force. They installed, humans being in those environments aren't good. So, like I said, it makes their job.
Yeah.
I agree, 100%. It should make their job easier, safer, and because now there will be a situation where you need less manpower. I feel like that does come, but as far as to say like a lights out plant, I've seen and heard of lights out plants. Shall I say? Haven't seen. I've heard of lights out plants, and it's not too many of them.
It's not too many of them.
It's not too many
But
of
it's
them.
not because it's not capable, it's the cost.
yeah.
You got, the finance team people say, yeah, we're not paying for that.
Yeah.
Yeah. How do you give me my ROI to turn
Yeah,
that around?
I've heard of lights out, but and the companies that I've heard of doing lights out robotics mainly have been people who build robots, right? Like the actual companies that build the robots.
Robots
Yeah.
are building the robots.
Yeah.
Exactly. No. There's robots building robots right now,
yeah,
and
yeah.
people don't realize that. But a lot of these industrial robots we get are partially built by robots to some scope, to some degree. They are built by robots.
Yeah, early in my career, I definitely had a sense of guilt. I did career day. I think it was the same day I met you. I had a first grader, and it was weird. And he might have been first grade, he might have been third grade, but it was a very young kid. He was like, my dad says you take jobs, right? And I'm like, oh boy,
Yeah.
And I didn't know how to respond to that, but because of that, there was that's the reason why I started doing robotics in the community with young kids. And that was important to me. I can say this, I've never been in a situation where the work that I do in robotics has taken a job, right? Robotics and automation do not take jobs. They create more jobs than they've ever taken. Right, now there's a play where I've been in a position where people retire, people quit, right? You just don't rehire. So, you see a lot of the job lost through attrition, not because the robots showed up.
Most
right?
definitely.
Yeah.
Most definitely. I agree.
Yeah, so, I can only think of one company I work with, and they had already wrote off the people because and then the system ended up not working.
Oh,
right?
that's not
They had
good.
already let everybody
That's
go.
not good.
Yeah, that didn't go well.
That's not good.
But that's not how it normally happens. Normally, you just kind of put people in an environment where you need the people, right? And that the people have to be there to make those things happen. But let's talk about mentorship as far as leadership. Like, I assume you guys both want to grow in your careers. Like, what do you think is needed to roll into leadership, and how important is mentorship to become that leader? I'll let you go first, James.
Yeah, I would say the thing that I'm working on right now as I try to become more of a leader is just like try to gain more experience in my domain so that when younger engineers come to me and things of that nature, I can say with more certainty that hey, I've had a very similar experience to that. This is how you operate and things of that nature. And it's even outside of the technical domain, just working in corporate America and things of that nature, just dealing with how to go to your boss and ask for a promotion or a raise and things of that nature. So just trying to gain those experiences so that when I start to lead more, that I can be more effective.
Okay, love it. And Jordan, for you, what advice would you give to a young black innovator who wants to get into robotics? I mean, because you found it in a godly way.
Yeah, it's a very, very different
so
way.
what's the advice you're giving to the young person who's watching this and say, I want to be like Jordan?
I would say do your research on the avenues to get there, and don't be afraid to pursue it. It's not always going to look like how you thought it would. It's not always going to happen how you thought it would happen. And I would say reach out to people and send them a LinkedIn message and say, hey, I'm interested in this. Any advice, because everybody's going to have a different perspective on this. All three of us have a different perspective on how to, one, get into it, how to be good at it, because we've done it differently. So we all have a slightly different perspective, and taking people's perspectives, but also don't let anyone tell you can't do it.
Yeah, that's right.
And it's not gonna be easy. It's gonna take perseverance. It's gonna take late nights. And when you get it, all always be a forward thinker, because the best advice I ever got, I would say, was an international paper from a PLC programmer. His name was LaDan Thomas. He told me, he said, learn your job, learn the guy before you, learn his job, and learn the guy after you, his job. Learn everybody's job. That will make you a stronger robotics engineer. You need to understand, before the work gets to you, what did he do? After the work leaves you, what do they need to do?
That's good
That
advice.
will make you the strongest robotic engineer you can be.
All right. So let's talk about the whole emphasis of BlerdOut, right? The goal that I had when I created this was to, how do we get all the black, innovative, science heavy, but very cool individuals in the room, right? But we know that there's a stigma that comes with being the intelligent person in the room. When I did my research, I learned that, a lot of black kids were bullied because they were smarter than their peers, and they made them look bad in the crowd, right? When I began the BlerdOut movement, it was because I was reading a story about a young girl who was in a STEM program in, I think, Maryland somewhere, and she had committed suicide because her friends were picking on her for being smart. Right? Can you even imagine that? I'm mad at you because you're smart.
That's so sad.
Right? There was another young kid, I believe in Texas somewhere, and he had committed suicide and hung himself in the closet because he was being picked on for being smart. Right? And it's just unbelievable. So for those out there who say, hey, I don't like you because you're smart, or you geeky, or you nerdy, or blurred. I don't like any of those words. Like, that's why we went the BlerdOut movement, right? To blur out the stigma that it's not cool to be smart. It is very cool to be the intelligent person in the room. It is very cool to sit at the front of the class. It is very cool to raise your hand. It's very cool to be an engineer, a doctor, a lawyer. Like, it is very cool to be part of the BlerdOut movement. But, like, what has that been like for you guys? Because I personally have experienced young kids who wanted to be on my robotics team, but declined the invitation because they were afraid of how their friends would see them on doing robotics, like it wasn't cool. And the BlerdOut, has always been about, intelligence is very cool, right? What has that been like for you, and how has that made an impact on your life where, being picked on and bullying and such, and being a blerd?
Yeah, so I guess I would say I've always been kind of on a little bit more of a nerdier kid. So like, I always thought like intelligence was cool, and like my parents are always like, yeah, like be an engineer, be a doctor, that's cool. But growing up, my cousins and everything would always kind of tease me because they're like, oh, like, why aren't you over here playing basketball with us and everything. But I think as I went to college, it became more and more accepted, and like, I found more people who were interested in that, and it became a lot more cool.
There you go. What about you?
I think mine was a little bit different. Like, I learned how to switch personalities at a very young age, because I had to go to class. I wouldn't say I was the only in high school. It was maybe every now and then maybe 2 or 3 kids in like the honors classes or the AP classes, like 2 or 3 every now and then. It wouldn't be too many. But then when I would leave there, like, none of my friends were like nerds, or like none of my cousins were nerds. So it's like, I've always had to maintain like that dual personality of like, and sometimes it can be a wee bit stressful, because like, it doesn't bother me because my friends are actually like my real friends, but they'll crack jokes like, oh, he gotta go study, huh? You gotta go study, huh? They'd be like, but then they would crack the jokes, but then when I came home for the test, like, they would generally ask me like, how was your test, man? Like, they actually cared. So that's how I knew, like, when I was in college, like, my friends would be like, oh, look at him going study, huh? Nerd, but after the test, they'd be like, you good? Like, everything went cool? Like, you'll get them next time. Like, you know what I'm saying? Stuff like that. So it's like, I think understanding you may have to play that dual, like, lifestyle of like, people outside of school may not understand you, like outside of your class, they may not understand that role. So just be comfortable with, being able to move in different environments, because it's going to be a thing.
I love that. I like that advice. One last question before we wrap up, James. So you started in, robotics programs at a very young age. Do you believe the robotic programs that are being, promoted in this middle school, high school, are effective enough to actually become a robotics engineer? And if not, what do those programs need to be doing to get a a young, aspiring robotics engineer to the finish line?
I would say that like the program we had at Burden and everything was pretty effective. I think like it's just a thing of like numbers, right? There aren't many programs like that. So like in the city of Detroit, we need more robotics teams and everything like that. And then also DAPSUP, Detroit College Pre-Engineering, they also have like a pretty good robotics program. But I think just we need more programs like that. So I think that the programs themselves are good, but there's just not enough of them.
So,
Yeah.
you were taught by a robot engineer, though.
Yeah.
Does it matter whether it's the teacher, a math teacher, or being taught by an engineer?
I think it's definitely better to be taught by an engineer. But I think like there are different ways that like you could also be taught by just a math teacher or a science teacher, like given just resources online or just like different curriculums and things that they could follow.
I love it.
Yeah.
And let's close out. Jordan, let's start with you. If you could just kind of tell our audience how they can find out, learn more about you and that young aspiring robotics engineer, you know, if they want to chat with you, can they catch up to you?
LinkedIn, man. That's
LinkedIn.
the best way to get, to contact me and talk to me about anything professional related, robot related. LinkedIn, man. So that's, I get my messages, I'll look at them and go from there.
Are you open to mentoring others who want to get into robotics industry?
Definitely. Definitely open to mentoring people and like I'll say this, I'm a real big person on hard work. And I really believe in working with people who really want it. Like, and if somebody that really wants it, man, I'll go as much as I can do for you. I'll do to the length of any information you need, anything you want to learn, I'll help you learn it. But it's really about somebody that wants to do it. Like.
All right. And James, tell the audience how they can find you, and are you open to mentoring?
Yeah, definitely open to mentoring. You can find me at James Meadows on LinkedIn.
Okay. All right. Awesome, gentlemen. So again, this is the BlerdOut podcast. We just want to thank James Meadows and Jor'Don Daigle for joining us today. Like, and everybody who's watching this, like, if you haven't seen or met a robotics engineer, this was the day. But not only just one robotics engineer, you had an opportunity to see three black robotics engineers together talking about how to move the innovation, how to move the community, and learn more about robotics, and not just any robotics, but being a black robotics engineer and what that looks like for our future. So we just want to thank you guys both for joining us, and this has been the BlerdOut podcast. We'll see you next time.
Confidence, yeah. It really shouldn't be no arguments, cause you're now viewing the greatest of all time.